Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the workshop. I'm Arden Chen. I use vegan pronouns and I'm a junior at WashU. And I just have a quick housekeeping note before we begin. This is workshop number 16, climate action planning, bringing communities together to equitably address sustainability, transit, and green infrastructure. It's a 1.5 hour session. We're going to end at 12:30. So if you're looking at a different workshop and you are in the wrong place, this is your chance to relocate. With that, I'm just going to hand it off to our first presenters here today.
Good morning. All right, so in the spirit of climate action planning, we're going to kick things off by contextualizing this conversation, thinking about where you came from. So we want to have a 5-minute discussion with those around you, thinking about what keeps you up at night in the context of climate change. So in your community or your organization, what are your biggest concerns in regards to climate change? So have those discussions, and then when we come back in 5 minutes, we are going to do a 1-word whip. So we're going to go around the room, and in 1 word, you're going to say the biggest concern that you talked about. Yeah. Sound good? All right, we'll regroup in 5 minutes.
Right away. So the question about this is there's so many things. So you guys solar panels and really specific. What should I not? What should I not? What should I not? I always wonder if like this kind of like different like water, seeing like what's happened in the past few years, like flooding like that, just like coming back again. The flooding for me is like 50%.
Hi, I'm not watching like and all things for one time dealt with that. I can be so there's not that I always have about my own. I feel like I think like how
Worked years. Now I don't see any butterflies. That's totally good. Like, certainly, I don't know if that's for people. Because the temperature goes because everybody is saying, well, that's not
I run that. Hopefully we've had some good conversations around climate change and what keeps us up at night. So for this one word web, it's going to be a little bit of a maze here. So just work with those around you to navigate where we're going with this. So we're going to go around and share that one word of what is keeping us up at night. What are we most concerned about climate change in the communities that we're in? So we'll go ahead and start with our presenters. So Nick, if you want to start us off with what's your one word, what's keeping you up at night?
urgency. Time.
And equity.
Trash. I have the timeline. Disproportionate. I also said equity.
Postponement. Extinction.
Plastics.
Oh, which way are we going? Sorry. Flooding.
Biodiversity loss.
Imprecision.
I'm a second for urgency.
Flooding.
Disasters.
Plastics. Flooding.
Overconsumption.
Yes.
Cat.
Capacity. Landfill.
Scarcity.
Complacency.
Mitigation.
Inequality. Indecision.
Plutocracy. Expedience.
Disagreement.
So.
Effectiveness.
Burning forests, melting ice, polar caps, and
House, yeah, right. So hopefully this exercise got us thinking and understanding there's so many issues out there. And we have to think very comprehensively about how we're going to address these types of issues, right? So in the spirit of climate change and climate action planning, we're going to talk about climate action planning, bringing communities together to equitably address sustainability, green infrastructure, and transit today. So we have 4 phenomenal presenters, and we'll go ahead and get started with those short presentations. And then really, we want you guys to get the most value out of this session. So that we're going to dive into breakout groups, and you can kind of move around between what issues you're most passionate about, and where you can get the most value. So we're going to kick it off today with Nick and I from Caramita.
Okay, thank you, Amber. My name is Nick McCreary, and I'm here with Amber from Caramita. We are an environmental consulting firm based in Indianapolis. Our operations are global. And within our sustainability division, within Caramita, we operate both in the corporate space and the municipal space, and we're really here to talk about our climate action planning process for municipalities and higher education. Within that area, and again, this is really broad. I won't go into the specific services that we offer, but we really focus on climate action planning, climate action implementation, which are absolutely two distinct processes, and climate action training for municipal staff, university staff, or stakeholders and communities. So a brief summary of who I am. I work with Amber on our Livable Cities initiative. I also work on scope 3 inventories, reduction planning, and climate scenario analysis of my areas. And I'll let Amber introduce herself and talk about our approach to climate action.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. So as Nick mentioned, my name is Amber Greeny. I have the pleasure of being the Livable City Solutions Manager at Caramita. I focus on our Livable City Solutions, mostly climate action planning, municipal engagement, and then also work with companies on their sustainability reporting. So I never get bored. Okay, so we're going to talk about an approach to climate action planning. We understand that there is no approach that is right. There's no copy and paste approach that we use. So every time we have the opportunity to work with the city, we will always customize our approach. So what we're going to do is present some key elements and themes that we use in our climate action planning approach that hopefully you can use as well. So we're going to present 6 key themes that you can use in your climate action planning process, whether a university, a municipality, or a corporate company. So the first step we have is data review, verification, and gap analysis. So for this step, we really want to focus on first greenhouse gases. If we want to mitigate greenhouse gases, we have to understand where those greenhouse gases are coming from so we can recommend the appropriate solutions. So that's step 1. And here you can see a gap analysis between greenhouse gas inventory that was done and then what the EPA recommends. So second part of this is data review, and this is really critical for understanding the cultural context of a community. So going into a city, we need to know things like, is there already a transportation plan? Is there already a master plan for walking and cycling? Is there already a plan for food strategies, for zoning? What are the existing zoning policies? So that way, and we'll come back to this in the final step, but once we get to that final roadmap, we want to understand how what we're going to recommend will integrate into all of the other plans. What we want to avoid is a plan that just sits on a shelf and collects dust. So we want to know, how are we going to integrate these strategies into other plans? Next, we have a climate scenario summary. So for this step, we're really focusing on what are the risks and what are the opportunities that are going to arise from different future scenarios. So whether a city will face a 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 or 5 different climate changing scenario, what will your city, what will your organization face given those circumstances? So we'll first think about physical risks and opportunities. So these are things some of you mentioned, like flooding, like increased heat stroke, vector-borne illness increases. So that's part 1. Part 2 is transitional risks and opportunities. So this is more in the context of what would happen if we shifted to a low carbon economy. So what if the federal government was to pass a law that said we have to think about putting a carbon tax on a city or on an organization? How would that actually affect our city? Then we move into benchmarking. And this is really key for helping a city or organization understand the landscape that they're working in, right? Because a climate action plan in the Midwest is going to look very different from a climate action plan on the coast. So we want to understand, what are peers doing? What are your aspirational peers doing? And then trying to understand, where do you want to exist within your climate action plan with, do you want to follow the standards other cities are setting for best practices? Do you want to be a leader in climate action planning? So how aggressive are you trying to tailor your approach to? Then we'll move into community engagement. So this step is really critical for later implementation and getting community buy-in. So in order for a community to have an effective climate action plan, the community has to feel that they were a part of creating it, and they should be a part of creating it because it really is tailored to a specific area. And this is also, I would say, one of the most fun parts of it because you get such a wide variety of stakeholders, getting high schoolers generating ideas with people that have lived in the community for their entire lives or with the mayor. So really unique context there. And this is also particularly important for helping generate new ideas. So acknowledging that community members are the experts in their community. So in order for them to play a role in developing the climate action plan, we want to know, what are your ideas? What has worked and what hasn't worked before, so that when we move forward with making these recommendations, we understand what opportunities we can take advantage of and what should we avoid, what has already been done that maybe didn't work. Then we move into the feasibility assessment. And this is really important for later implementation. So what we want to avoid is making a recommendation that then we find out that is actually not something that we have the budget for, or that's not something that we have the staff for, or the capacity. So an example of this is if you want to make a recommendation to capture methane from a wastewater treatment plant, we want to talk to the person that runs the wastewater treatment plant to make sure, is there space in the loading dock to have the capacity to ship this methane off? So addressing those types of concerns are really important for implementation. So again, you don't have a plan that just sits on a shelf, but the people implementing it know they're going to be able to implement it and have the capacity to do so. And this will really help shape that final greenhouse gas roadmap. And this is the part where we're going to tie everything together. So these are really, they're not arbitrary steps, right? So everything we did here is going to inform this. So with the greenhouse gas roadmap, we're contextualizing. So what did we learn in that data review? So what plans already exist? Is there a transportation plan that we can tie in strategies into that climate action plan so that they work in synergy? We're not developing just another plan with no context to what else is already going on in the community. And with this, we're going to provide a variety of steps. So we might have policy recommendations, such as implementing a benchmarking ordinance where large buildings are required to report on their energy usage. We may recommend working in partnership with a local university. So those are some examples, or understanding what capacity there is for solar in a community or for EV charging stations. So really building on the work that was done with the community, with the data analysis, and understanding the future scenarios that the city or organization will be facing. So together, we believe that we are catalysts for change. So we would love to dive into what a climate action plan might look like for your city or for your organization. And so in the 30-minute breakout session, we're going to be going through a simulated version of this where we'll talk through each of these 6 steps with you and try and start brainstorming some ideas for what that might look like for you and your organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dawn and Alessandra from Jacobs. Thank you for your time.
So well. Just put this one.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. My name is Dawn. As you can see, my colleague Alessandra is not here. She will be joining virtually. We pre-recorded her sections here, and then she'll be joining us via Teams throughout our breakout session. So yeah, lovely to be here. The basic agenda is we're gonna run through some basic introductions. We're gonna talk about how we approach climate action planning from a holistic sustainability perspective, integrating social equity as much as possible. We're going to briefly dive into federal opportunities to include social equity in your projects, what tools you can leverage throughout that entire process, and then in our breakout session, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into those tools and other legislation requirements and how we recommend certain solutions for our corporate and private public clients. And we're going to dive into a case study looking specifically at a transit transformation project that is currently ongoing. And then the last thing we'll talk about are some basic applications to how we can implement everything in your projects. Okay. So as I said, my name is Dawn, pronouns she, hers. I'm actually a WashU graduate. I studied anthropology, so it's really lovely to be back. Kind of like a weird full circle moment. It's so weird watching around campus. I am currently a sustainability consultant at Jacob Solutions, which is an engineering and management consulting company. We have clients all over the world, which is really exciting. A lot of my work is supporting the internal Jacobs sustainability work. So how can Jacobs, as a massive conglomerate, be more sustainable in our actions? How can we integrate sustainability within all of our lines of business? And the other 30% of my work is dedicated to working with clients, both corporate and public clients, and helping them achieve their sustainability goals. And my main driver is, I grew up in Alabama, I'm Asian. I've seen firsthand the impacts of climate change on communities of color. And I don't think there's enough advocacy for these communities, so that is why I'm in the space that I'm in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alessandra Smith, pronouns she, her. I am also an employee at Jacobs, working as an urban planner and consultant. Similarly to Dawn, I also work a little bit with sustainability, net zero, with public and private clients in terms of space management, facility management, and just helping them overall with systems, organization, and efficiency. In terms of the driver for me, I am also invested in communities, specifically communities that have been disadvantaged for an extended period of time, and helping them face their inequities with proper resources. So just so you know, throughout this presentation, I will be joining you virtually. Unfortunately, I was not able to be there, but you'll hear me narrating and speaking on several of tools and other aspects of the presentation that I think are just super beneficial for you to know. So sorry I can't be there, but it's great to join you guys virtually.
So as I mentioned, we're really focused on a holistic version of sustainability. And I think oftentimes when you think of sustainability, people immediately gravitate towards emission reduction, water reduction, waste reduction. And I think that's great, but I think oftentimes we focus too much on those quantitative aspects that we lose sight of the people that are actually being impacted by climate change. So for example, when a company says we want to reduce emissions by 90%, okay, where are you reducing those emissions? Are you prioritizing communities of color that have been impacted for several years, or are they already communities that have minimal damage to their pollution quality? And we are focusing on a variety of different scenarios to help us get to this holistic sustainability, strategic thinking. We're looking at political scenarios, economic scenarios, what technology exists, what legislation exists. And also we definitely need to think about the environmental scenarios that are at stake here. And I think you'll probably hear me mentioning equity more than equality. I'm sure this is a very basic topic for everyone, but just so everyone knows, equality is more about giving the same resources to everyone regardless of background, whereas equity is creating more tailored solutions to people depending on the social constructs, the social situations, their demographics, their backgrounds. It's really about leveling the playing field by tailoring solutions to the people who are involved.
On our last slide, Dawn spoke about the difference between equality and equity. And to truly address equity, especially social equity, we need resources. And on this slide, I want to touch on some of the resources that are available. The biggest one being the bipartisan infrastructure law, which released billions of dollars that are allocated to investing in several different categories that you see highlighted on the screen. So clean water, wastewater, climate change, transit, clean energy, and pollution reduction. And I definitely want to touch on the Justice 40 initiative too. So that initiative is that with all of those billions of dollars, that 40% of those funds are invested into areas of persistent poverty and disadvantaged communities. So definitely a step in the right direction toward advancing social equity. If you'd like to learn more about Justice 40, I have a QR code in the bottom for you as well.
These are some federal funding opportunities. These slides I think will be shared with you later, so you can always come back to this. I'm not gonna run through this, but I do want to highlight this bottom one here, which is specifically catered for the Justice Department.
All right, hello everyone. So now we're gonna just explore some federal tools and resources that grants and different projects use to, I'll say evaluate social equity. So I know you'll see the title of the slide is measuring social equity, and I want to challenge that because when it comes to evaluating someone's quality of life, their lived experience, it's hard to actually measure, especially when we're just using quantitative data. So I do want to just show that these are resources. They're not the end all be all, but they're great tools and resources to help you look at what might be going on in a particular area. So the first tool I want to touch on is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is from the White House. So what you'll do is, you go to this map, you'll see a whole lot of tracks for this demonstration. I'll just put in St. Louis just because that's where the conference is. Search it. And it'll give you a view of the city. So you can zoom in. All of this is divided by census tract. So for instance, I'll just hit this one. Everything is highlighted because it's designated as disadvantage, as you can see here on the left side. It'll give you the tract number, the county name, state, of course, and population. And you can kind of get some more demographic information in terms of race and ethnicity, and also age. So when you zoom in a little bit more, you'll see how the tract is actually designated as disadvantaged from different categories. So the ones that are highlighted navy blue are how it's categorized as disadvantage. So this one is disadvantage in climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution. And then just for more information, you can kind of see at what statistic they're above for it to be considered disadvantage. So for this particular one, it's expected loss of population, and you can get a little bit more insight. So this is one great tool. I really enjoy it just because it goes into more depth about what is actually going on in the area because of the different categories. So the next tool I want to show you is here it is, the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, also a great tool for the CDC. There are 4 different themes within. So you have social economic status, household characteristics, racial and ethnic minority, and housing type and transportation. You can have different math features, of course, and you can pick the day year, which is also a really great aspect. So you can have it start from before COVID, way early in the 2000s. For also I'll do Missouri one more time. You can zoom in, of course, see a little bit more what's going on. So at the very bottom, you see the levels of vulnerability of this color being low, medium, high. So right here in St. Louis, it has a high level of vulnerability, and it tells you what that is from a score of 0 to 1. So 1 being a very high level of vulnerability and 0 being a very low level, as you can see here. The next tool I would like to go over is the grant project location verification. It's a long title there, but also another mapping resource. So when you go here, you can also, of course, put in your location. It'll zoom in, and this actually tells you the numbers that are associated with the tract. You can zoom in. There's a lot going on here with the colors. But when you're navigating this tool, I would definitely recommend going through the layer list here so you can minimize what you're seeing. So I just want to see historically disadvantaged tract. It'll just simplify into just that one color versus having all these colors overlaid over each other. And if you want more detail, it'll just tell you what colors it is. If I want to just do this is in Property County, it won't give you much detail, but if I want to look at tract, I also have that option. Another great tool, again, not an end all be all, but just to get a sense of where you're looking and what's going on. And the final tool I want to highlight is the EPA's DJ screen. Might be familiar with this tool. Another great tool. Put in St. Louis, of course. This one's a little bit more detailed, but it'll zoom into the regular area. And this is kind of where I want to tell it more specific indexes and indicators that I'm looking for. So if I want to just do environmental justice, I go to ozone. it'll give me the percentiles. So this one is definitely a little bit more detailed if you're looking for some very specific information. I can kind of just show you all of the categories they have within these. Like I said, they're really great resources to just look and get a sense of what's going on. But again, hard to measure social equity. So these are just resources to help us get a better picture of what's going on. But again, it doesn't tell people's, lived experience and their stories. I'd like to encourage you, while you use these tools, just have an understanding that it might not ever be as beneficial as actually talking to people, talking to communities, seeing what they're actually going through, because the data might not reflect it. But I hope this was helpful, and I hope that if you're wanting to learn more, you come to our breakout session.
Okay, now the last slide is just an overview. As Alessandra mentioned multiple times, social equity is not an easily distillable quantitative metric. Lots of lived experiences and qualitative information is needed to properly understand social equity within the community. But again, there are tools that we can leverage to get a better understanding of what's going on. We can use tools from Justice 40. We can use various raters and makers, which companies can leverage for their own sustainability needs, which I'll go into in our breakout session. And then there are obviously some building institutions that we use and that people use. I think the most important takeaway that we want everyone to have is there shouldn't be a silo between environmental metrics and social metrics. They should all be interconnected. If we're thinking about emissions, if we're thinking about water, if we're thinking about waste, we should always distill it down to who is being impacted, how can we help those communities that are being impacted, how can we have them. So yeah, that was it.
Good morning, everyone. It's really been two great discussions from Don, Andrew, and Nick there. And excited for this summit, and hopefully everyone's ready to be wet on the mobile workshops this afternoon. I'm Malcolm Mossman, and I'm with Delta Institute. I'm a senior specialist. We're an environmental nonprofit based in Chicago, but we work throughout the Midwest and Great Lakes region. I help manage our portfolio of nature-based climate solutions projects, particularly focused in Northwest Indiana and city of Chicago. And so we've had an introduction to climate action planning and how we integrate social equity into climate action planning. And I wanted to talk with everyone today about a specific component of climate action planning and resiliency planning, and that's green infrastructure planning, but more importantly, implementation, and how we can, why we need to follow a community-based planning and implementation approach when we're talking about green infrastructure for communities. So what do I mean when I'm talking about green infrastructure? It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And essentially, I think it's all of those things. It's a big umbrella, but to distill it down to one definition, it's simply a range of measures or types of infrastructure that that use natural features and functions to store, infiltrate, or evapotranspirate stormwater, which then reduces the flows to the storm sewer systems, in addition to other passive ecosystem services. So that can range from anywhere from a tree or a rain barrel to projects as large as engineered wetlands. So that's something I think everyone kind of gets. We're all here. We have kind of a similar understanding of what green infrastructure is, but wanted to move on to probably the more important question, which is what benefits does green infrastructure provide? Do folks want to throw some benefits out there? What are some benefits of green infrastructure? Reduce flooding. Cooling, yeah, urban heat island mitigation. Aesthetics, yeah, absolutely. Water quality improvements. Clean air. What was that? Clean air. There's a lot here, right? There's mental health, health and wellness, absolutely. Habitat. What was that? Habitat expansion, habitat preservation, protecting pollinator species. all very important. So there's a lot of intersecting infrastructures and networks where green infrastructure sits at the center of these. You know, like you said, flood mitigation, water quality improvement, you know, social cohesion, having something, a social gathering space for the community and a location for the community to identify with and work together around improving. And then this isn't to mention the economics and the community development that this helps for, and the economic stability that can come from well-planned community-based infrastructure. So, you know, green infrastructure can improve a community in a lot of ways, and help build important resiliency to the effects of climate change, right? So it's a really important tool in the toolbox when we're talking about resiliency for our communities. And even more importantly, it can provide benefits to under-resourced neighborhoods and populations that are even more or the most susceptible to the impacts of climate change. And so when we're thinking about how do we protect, you know, our most vulnerable populations, the neighborhoods on the front lines of climate change, green infrastructure is a really important tool to consider. Taking all this into account, it's clear that there's a need for local governments and organizations and various entities and institutions to follow a community-based planning processes to help ensure that green infrastructure is one, implemented at the scale required in the communities that need it most and in ways that align best with community priorities. But obviously, like most things, that is easier said than done. This slide is a little messed up, as you can see, so that's okay. You can get the general gist of the 5 phases of green infrastructure development here, but I'll mostly be talking about kind of the buckets of barriers that various communities, municipalities, organizations that are embarking on green infrastructure planning and implementation processes, what they're facing. And so Delta has developed this through some research that we've developed over the last year, as well as our experience partnering with communities on implementing and planning for green infrastructure. And the barriers largely fall in 3 buckets. One is a lack of funding to support planning and capital costs. That's an issue across various types of infrastructures and systems. The other bucket is lack of capacity to go seek additional funding, even grant funding applications, grant funding, pursuing grant funding opportunities takes a lot of time and capacity, and a lot of communities do not have that, or even the match funds to be able to pursue as much as they possibly need. And capacity also restricts community-based processes, right? We were just talking in our kind of little breakout before the beginning of this about community-based approaches are really important, and it's difficult to balance the urgency of climate change and the impacts of climate change with the process, the lengthy process, oftentimes of community-based engagement. If you want to do it right, it is going to take time. So how do you balance those 2 things? And that requires a lot of capacity. And then finally, the third bucket is a lack of awareness, which is oftentimes driven by a lack of available data pointing towards quantifiable impacts that GI provides. But right now is also a great opportunity. So there are a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers, but there's a lot of opportunities kind of emerging right now. Number one is the urgency. And urgency drives creativity, it drives action. And so we have a combination of aging infrastructure and climate impacted, precipitation events, really driving the urgency of this issue and forcing us to think of new ways, new partnerships, new processes to solving this. There's also the windfall of federal funding opportunities coming down the pipeline. Like last night, we heard about some of the technical assistance services that are expanding. There are opportunities starting to emerge for new partnerships. And then finally, communities are more engaged and informed than ever and deserve a seat at the table. And there are many opportunities to do that. So this is why Delta works with communities to work with under-resourced communities and municipalities to implement, plan and implement green infrastructure practices that hopefully address a community's unique environmental, economic, or social challenges. We do this via capacity support, as well as the establishment of replicable planning and implementation procedures and templates. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples fairly quickly. I have 2 minutes here, but we'll have our breakout session and we'll be able to dig a little bit more deeper into the process itself and how do you develop a community engagement plan specifically for a green infrastructure plan, and how do you move that to implementation, actually getting things in the ground. So right now, currently, I'm working on a project on Chicago South Side. We're looking to plan and design and install 4 green infrastructure sites on formerly vacant parcels in the neighborhoods of Washington Park, Woodlawn, and South Shore. And so we're partnering with Emerald South Economic Development Collaborative on their Terra Firma project. They've been doing this for a long time. They've been converting vacant parcels to green spaces. They've been following the clean, green, beautify model established in Philadelphia. And so we're going to be partnering with them, Metropolitan Planning Council, but most importantly, local community groups within each of these neighborhoods to help guide us through this process so that we determine the best locations for these projects and the best features to address their priorities. So we're following a community-based or community-driven process. And so as you can see here, in year 1, we just wrapped up year 1. So we've gone through a site prioritization and planning process, included surveys and community discussions to first start talking about what factors are really important to incorporate into our prioritization when we're talking about where green infrastructure should go. Obviously, flooding is a major, factor, but what else do we need to consider? And what really came through was how important it was to have it located near other community institutions, community gardens, community libraries, schools, community centers, where there's already they function as community gathering spaces, but there's also infrastructure and social structure in place. And we've gone through partnership agreements, identifying stipend policies for our community engagement plan, which we developed in partner with some of the community groups that we've been working with through the planning process. And now we're just embarking on our community vision process, where we'll be having workshops to identify what do these sites actually look like, in addition to the features. We've also partnered with communities in Northwest Indiana, as I mentioned. Hobart, Indiana is an example of this. We continue to provide them project management support, capacity support, but several years ago, we went through a planning and grant assistance program. We developed a decision matrix that was developed with community input, but also had several sections of it that helped determine what kind of BMP should be placed where, depending on community priorities and community challenges. And finally, we have our Resilient Infrastructure for Sustainable Communities project. This is we're part of a project team led by ECT to develop delivery and financing frameworks for climate adaptation and stormwater mitigation efforts. There are a lot of tools developed as part of this, reviewed by our cluster of municipal staff who are involved in resiliency, sustainability, stormwater management efforts. And we've developed plenty of templates, plenty of reports that are useful to municipal staff and organizations, institutions that are interested in community-based green infrastructure planning. Skip past that for now. This is just one of the tools that we provide. And if you're interested in taking a look at everything that was on there, you can go to either of those links, deltainstitute.org/publication or risk.solutions. You can also email me at Austin. So I'll be in some space in this room. We'll be talking about talking through some questions about green infrastructure planning and implementation processes, community-based processes, and then specifically working through building a community engagement plan for a green infrastructure planning and implementation process. If you're interested in learning about that, I'll be chatting about that.
So our fourth presenter was not able to make it today. So she went ahead and made a video for all of us to watch, but she wishes she could be here.
Good morning to the Midwest Climate Summit audience. I'm Stephanie Hacker. I represent GRACE. It is a multidisciplinary planning, design, and engineering firm based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but with offices in Wisconsin, Illinois, and in Florida, as well as in the Turks and Caicos. So coming to you today virtually to greet you and appreciate your energy and attention on this important topic. I will turn it over to John Carter, a teammate in the development of Climate Ready Oak Park, who is here to join us in talking about this project, and then over to Marcella Bondi-Keenan from the Village of Oak Park. So John, over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm John Carter. I'm a senior engineer with Eastern Research Group. We are a mid-sized multidisciplinary environmental consulting firm. Among many other things, we provide greenhouse gas inventory and climate action planning support at pretty much every level of government and organization. We support EPA's U.S. inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. We've supported a handful of states, counties, college campuses, and municipalities like Oak Park.
Hello, my name is Marcella Bondi-Keenan. I'm with the Village of Oak Park Office of Sustainability. Thank you for coming today. Oak Park is a suburb that borders the western edge of Chicago. We're about 55,000 people, only 5 square miles, pretty dense place, and somewhat diverse population. I wanted to start with some highlights of the Climate Ready Oak Park Plan implementation as perceived by Marcella, who is working to move things forward rather swiftly after plan development was completed late last year. So Marcella, please feel free to talk through some of the highlights of what's happening as Oak Park is implementing its climate plan. Yeah, well, since we adopted the plan in August and declared a climate emergency, a lot of the early work was launching the plan and making sure everybody understood the short-term objective, which includes a 60% reduction in our greenhouse gases by 2030, very aggressive, and the high impact actions that were developed by the team to get there. So for us, building energy and transportation energy are the two big sectors to hit, and we've been working a lot on the policy angles of that. We just passed the benchmarking ordinance, and we're working on an ordinance to require all electric new construction. I'm hoping that we can get to a building performance standard down the line. On sort of the other angle, the community has a lot of interest in waste reduction, and so we're also working on a single-use plastics ordinance that addresses plastic bags and foodware and styrofoam. But on the community side as well, there's been a lot of energy around our environmental groups that are, volunteer run, and wanting to do outreach to their neighbors, as well as reach out to the volunteer groups that are maybe more equity focused, but not tied into climate issues. And so we have some exciting new partnerships and happening there.
Well, our role in this project was to review and audit a few previous years of greenhouse gas inventories that Oak Park had prepared. We also produced a new inventory for the most recent year, and then created a business as usual forecast of future emissions out through 2050 that really serves as kind of the baseline of emissions for all the reduction calculations and everything that went into the plan in terms of mitigation. We also created or calculated science-based target emission reductions for year 2030 that would kind of serve as an interim goal on the way to Oak Park's ultimate goal of climate neutrality by 2050. So, it was a matter of digging into a lot of those old numbers and researching previous year's data, making sure that it was all entered and used accurately, and creating graphics and really communicating some of those emissions and the forecast of emissions to the public there in Oak Park, including the Board of Trustees and the public in general. Again, I really see this as kind of the backbone or the basis of all the additional work that was done and implementation of what was captured in the affinity groups and through other public engagement.
I'll add on to your mention of the affinity groups and Marcella, your earlier piece about the importance of the social equity and representation in conversations about climate issues, to say that to the Village of Oak Park's credit, early in the process, Marcella and staff developed an affinity group process for engagement in the Climate Ready Oak Park development. And along with that came an approval and a structure for compensating those who participated in the process of engaging, which is something that we're starting to see more across the country, but it's still not common enough in order to fight that feeling of planning fatigue, especially from those who are underrepresented in these conversations. So the Village of Oak Park did a really beautiful job navigating the upfront development for the public engagement so that it would work throughout and in implementation. And I'd also highlight that in developing the plan with the village, I have a mentor who always reminds me that we, in planning decades ago, used to more regularly include plan development with capital improvement planning, and that we've kind of let that fall by the wayside, but not so with the Village of Oak Park. We worked together toward the end of the plan development to open up the capital budget and the operating budgets and look next year and look 5 years down the road to say, for every action in this plan, where can it be most appropriately housed, when, and by what source of general funding? And then where there were gaps in funding identified from the village budget, where can the village seek partners in funding those actions? And so that's a highlight of the Climate Ready Oak Park in moving from planning to implementation that I want to highlight for the group. Well, John mentioned the graphics for the business as usual forecast and the trend line to get to the 2030 and 2050 goals. And I have to say that really being able to internalize that and then communicate it to the policymakers, our trustees, has been essential for helping the village stay on target when making policy and budgeting decisions. Being able to point to our handful of 6 impact strategies that will really get us to 2030 has been invaluable. And with the affinity groups, my hope is that they will continue to engage as our implementation partners as well. And it's started to happen already. For the single-use plastics ordinances, part of our goal in the Office of Sustainability is to make sure that our policies are developed in an equitable way. So rather than just sort of top-down expert-driven recommendations, we work with community members to have a series of design thinking workshops to develop the policy together. And that included members of our disability affinity group, because for plastics, you might know, single-use plastics are in many cases an important accommodation for members of that community. So I'm excited to see how the planning process is continuing to give rise to better ways of policy making.
I just wanted to thank you both. I think it was a successful partnership between Oak Park, Grafe, and ERG. And I'm glad to hear that the plan has already started to bear fruit there on the ground in Oak Park.
In closing, until we hope, those of you in the audience in the future, please visit sustainoakpark.com as an example of the work that has been and is being done to implement Climate Ready Oak Park, and enjoy your time in St. Louis and at the conference.
Great, thanks Stephanie and team. So at this point, we're gonna break out into our sessions now. So we're gonna have Nick and I over here talking about climate action planning processes. We'll have Dawn and Alessandra up here talking about social equity and planning, and then we'll have Malcolm in the back here talking about green infrastructure. So thank you guys for your time, and we'll regroup in the last 5 to 10 minutes.
Where would you like us to sit?
I know, we're well. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. Open it up.
Director of the sustainability. Okay. I'm Molly, I'm the brown. Oh.
Maybe everyone. Great instruction. Be talking through how we're gonna build a community engagement plan or sort of planning and implementation process. We'll get to that. The first one is to see if folks had any initial questions. Burning questions about grant structure, implementation, planning, involving the community process. Challenges.
Why would you have to say the way you want to look at the recording?
A lot of our partners that we were to have them look at them up at night. That would be it.
I mean, we can pause for a second.
There's a specific type of expertise and other folks have that same experience.
You've already heard it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big one, for sure. And I mean, in our experience,
My name is Samantha Bennett.
having a community, like having a community-based approach actually does figure out some of those issues a lot of times. Well, there's a lot of workforce development, opportunities starting to be developed. And there are a lot of opportunities for assistance, thinking more creatively about how you can maintain these sites, right?
Maybe,
What kind of MOUs can you enter into with community engagement, who have helped you along the way with this process? Planning and putting in. What are the education opportunities you need to have your staff? We have to get started. Actually, over in the end, we developed a maintenance plan and an RFP and procurement process for putting that out to bid. We'll put it out to bid, I think, every 3 to 5 years. For the maintenance services of energy. We have to have
On the next and the right person.
It seems when you're nowhere to leave the pool and just it's a little easier to plan. Anything that in the previous session, I was surprised to hear that the speaker mentioned in Iowa, they actually had a with with that. And so that's really, I think, what it's complicated. Maybe when you start to really you make decisions about whether this direction or that.
So is this a question about where to, like, just to zoom in on your question, is about where to shift? So, there's a lot of, kind of identify strategies or.
And we need to make decisions to go one direction or another direction.
So I think it's really useful oftentimes to kind of level set at the beginning and determine what is the problem. Like, I think that's always the question I come back to, and oftentimes we're a little bit ahead of ourselves with the practices and what we want to do and what we think needs to be done. And we haven't really had a discussion about what you're trying to solve. And I think that helps focus you for the rest of the process. For example, like in South Shore, we mentioned it. Working on every project, community driven resiliency project. South Shore. So, and you may not know, Chicago has massive lakefront. There's a lot of upper but a lot of fluctuating lake levels. Rain events, flooding. There are two sections of Chicago where South Shore is one of them. There's been a lot of good efforts and progress made on the north side, south side of Chicago. So there's been a lot of ideas in infill, throwing in new park space, but then that takes away the private lakefront access that a lot of residentially enjoy. And there have been discussions about building islands and barriers out into the lake. But the community needs to be at odds, as well as some of the state agencies, federal agencies, city, about what should propose. They like to have a vision first. And so major step one to do is not even providing. Really asking, like, what do you think of this plan? What do you think of the strategy? It's really about, okay, what are the challenges?
But thank you.
Like, that's the major issue at play here. We all agree that it's flooding of the streets and there's a train line and the interruption to public transportation. Because they're gonna have to, based on that, we'll start to go into this direction. But we have to have, discussion by the regional census and.
Corporation has so much power over that, so I'm going to try to work on should be flying for you, doing part of the for ensure the longevity of the next in the rooms, water system. You're always really on still correct, those guys should be ready. A lot of bigger stormwater. Here, and it's not like it's gonna keep you in industrial. Water.
You're saying, like, yeah, absolutely, I totally get it. I'd be curious if other folks here have an answer for that. I'd be curious if the answer for that. I will just say that, City of Chicago, at least with their vacant land revitalization strategy, they now started to get we were partnering on converting some of these parcels to things. And we are in direct competition with the city of and essentially get tell them you have to find a lot of functionality and also tell them you're not going to develop and if you do, you need to otherwise, provide, provide study. And so they have prioritized affordable housing development.
So are these funding sources, are they all government, like state and local governments?
No.
Study success, you know, pushing against.
Yeah.
Development.
Are there any, sorry?
So we were talking about learning capacity and barriers, so we study higher level.
With a lot of like volunteers.
So we run this on small to mid-size cities.
Centralized information. And I realize it's set up to be,
They have just as many.
inaccessible for a reason.
Oftentimes, infrastructure, you know, they really like it. They got funding for. They're trying to find, really can. There's no learning. Funding is very after.
I feel like we're just so, there's one place everyone can go to.
So, you know, I challenge a lot of small businesses, which, you know, all the access them definitely major. Trying to find creative ways to provide. Sitting there ready for yeah, you have to be very, you don't, I don't. For that reason. And north of the end, family. More opportunities there. Put in place, family program. In Chicago. But you know, again, you know, that's favors. Yeah, sure. Maintenance is and if it's not maintained, you run the risk of each suddenly turning against the track. So if or key in, you know, we work with them, installation. Other beaches, parking lot, and files square on real pavement. And your first question was, if they didn't have knowledge, has to be funding to maintain, which is big, and some of their first grant installation of pavement, on the installation of that site and and community and counselors and staff. I don't know.
So your community is municipality. I think in St. Louis, there's an public 25 initiative in North St. Louis County.
Really,
the 24 municipalities. Occasionally they will, I mean, I think there's one over there, salt for the roads. It's not like out of the scale, and they're all small municipalities, they're small and equal size. So like, on certain issues, like an effort a while back, that I don't. All the municipalities or acres, them, and then like, no, we like still our government, but we still want our representation, but we have to speak collaboratively and save money that way, and be more competitive that way. So what is the main?
It's not what was on.
Yeah, it's just.
So like.
Yeah, trying to pick up in areas where there's not really.
Yeah.
And also. So like, you have to figure out. You might get an underdrain, you have to figure. It's not something that I'm over. Where it's a different. Not, you know, it's not rocket science, but it is.
Or they're the communities or census tracts that are maybe qualified
About
to that actually get to. So I think
Yeah, we recently
in
had
terms of
through.
helping write grants, have access to public meetings for these people. They always have actually doing any kind of connection with the community versus you. With the resources. So that's the only thing that I would.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good.
The thing how. They're great. I did one thing, considering that like all sense of,
But I don't know, I was a little bit screwed up, so you couldn't see the video. We're gonna use-
And-
kind of write them out again here and place them up on the wall and walk.
evaluating how that changes. Period.
And what sort of strategy and what would be active and. at that point, sort of we have it. When it works, that's you, trust, and trust, that we can.
Yeah, it's the same in place. Again, like working within the system. But.
Or we even get into the planning.
How can we?
So as a reminder,
What
the
people we have.
things that we identify. Planning, and then there's pre-development, which is your budget lined up, budget approval, identifying funding opportunities.
So I'll find a lot about.
Getting political buy-in, and then there's development, which is going to be developing your site plan, start procuring your designers, construction managers, identifying additional funding opportunities, gap funding opportunities. There's going to be a lot of engagement during this portion. Then you have implementation. You've got funding. Everything's been approved, planning to finalize. Now you're actually implementing, managing the site. Hopefully have some sort of contractors or paying construction and that process. And then there's maintenance and monitoring. It all is about maintenance. If you don't maintain properly, if you don't monitor the impact of the site, if you just go back and go back to your plan. So with that in mind, before we even get to the planning process, what should we be thinking about? Who should we be engaging? How do we even start a planning process?
I'm not sure if this is the third place, but under the people maybe so my great interest in one thing. I have a very good contractor up there who is, they've all got pretty reciprocating. So I'm trying to. Under, yeah, we hear about corporations, but I can find.
Education and knowledge sharing, would you say that? Like it's kind of getting everyone to a level of base understanding of what's available, what we're talking about.
We're gonna have all companies saying, oh, no, you
Sorry.
well, you're not. Instead of.
3 minutes. Thinking about it, on,
We're just bringing away.
cost effective, don't get me wrong. there's still great questions. Obviously, stakeholder,
Other campus, other.
for the cardinal. There's a fine design.
Sounds like you got.
As a result, they have added on a new layer of priority, which includes everything, so acquisition, the water usage, the sustainability ordinance, which is really key, but I think it's just the starting point. A lot of it is already figured out. I'm gonna come out of way of not feeling. We teach them about ranges, so we have to come to tell them. They do not, they are big, like, they learn about it, but they are. Client, supplier.
During the pre-development phase, trying to get that close to bottom, right? Youth engagement is more powerful than people get it. So that's a great point, and it should be set into the back of everyone's mind.
So on path materiality, we one dimension, what we talked about action factors, what action factors are. I will say I was impacting about nowadays because of the economy and the world.
I think it provides bias perspective, I'm sure. How do you engage with the other voices in the community that maybe we can definitely get into that. I know you had one more.
So when you see David, I don't know if you can dig into that or not, but I think there's some time on
These are all the things that even before you started to officially, engage in the planning process, to keep in mind and to always be there's always opportunities for education, so that you have what challenges they're facing, putting words to the not coming into the community. How are we engaging the community? Having community discussion, having the key to my store, bringing in other experts from the community, and done something really innovative to talk and lead the discussion. And not just be the my host. Okay, so now we're on to
my role
the planning. Which is big. This is part that it's a multi-year process of design. It's a big part of it. From larger comprehensive plans, re-infrastructure plans, and just getting down to site prioritization. Say, what are the priorities? So it's a big one, there's a lot. So I'm taking a look here at my sheet.
So my goal really is to combine
So
ESG goals and.
you mentioned identifying, which is really important here. We're thinking about a plan, how should we be engaging? I often think that we develop a community engagement plan as we heard here. So this is kind of like it's a complicated situation right now. I'm like, well, we're going to develop a community engagement plan, but none of us, we're not thinking about a specific community. And I think it's community engagement plan is really something that you can build in. You need to run those strategies by them. And I think step one to that is identifying the key stakeholders and start having conversations with them. Tell them about the money costs that you're going to embark on. What strategies work, what strategies do you think are going to work? Then to engage your community. And bring them in really early.
Looking at political content.
I think a lot of well-intended community engagement plans, whatever reason, they allow you opportunity to tell you what they think will work. I think that's so we're just talking about the planning process, I think, but we can dig really deep. So I'm going to invite you to the first thing, which is community discussions around.
We want to.
I like that this is an ongoing project, so the community is still going on. We realize that this entire subway line is right next to a huge river, so there's a lot of erosion, a lot of, and there's no flood base set up, so truly it's just all hell breaks. There's a lot of room. And it's in the northeast, so a lot of wind, a lot of rain, a lot of snow, which are bad for the construction workers as well, because they can't do the rail.
What were some?
Extreme weather conditions. They are underlying water. If weather conditions are definitely. The only good part is that free.
Can you share what city it is? Okay. No.
People don't.
So in terms of community engagement, understand the community perspectives about.
Policy, really use this.
Population is around.
For those members of the steering committee, but also to compensate any resident for their expertise, whether it is attending.
So this is, I know I was the leader, but this is pretty much.
Data survey, even, online survey, paper survey. And generally, the number that we go with is about $25 to $30 an hour. That's not a standard. Set aside some funds. Survey.
And we also talk about.
But it's really think about that. We try to build
a lot of people on what we're really frustrated about, and in the end, we come up with this 4 list of priorities. It is 3 lines, so obviously because it's pretty much people need to work from the building work. And the liability is a huge factor. And we also have to make sure that it is whether
any other, sorry, go ahead.
I think every,
the other thing is really
The same level.
And when you look at people and take on
Roads.
they would even be most simple to your church, but read all of their group. Have their accumulated loss. That way, it's like, the train riding group are so, they're able to run, it's, that's no, people with wheelchairs, they don't need their wheels.
Laying out
Those are
what is green structure, what are its benefits,
huge issues.
what are some examples.
Public transportation.
Really helpful if there's some already in the community pilots that exist, these point towards that. I often like to engage, as an alternative, oftentimes for the town hall structure. To your question, I think it's really useful to one, meet people where they are. Try to have multiple workshops. I think people are losing. Again, you can put another time thing, but you're, eating or providing some sort of compensation and how that always helps. Isn't that hard to get shared? Lately, COVID, of course, that we have a little bit. Provided in-person events, maybe provide a virtual, event, childcare, what have you. Obviously, there are a lot of blind spots in virtual engagements, so that would not be a piece, but it can be one way.
Those are.
Cost. And I really believe in months, engagement groups and having walk, having this discussion, take a look at places and have, I think people's creativity flows a little bit more when they see space that they're talking about rather than seeing. Microphone and talk, and it's a lot more natural, a lot more easier.
How it usually works.
That's initial engagement, collecting information on biodiversity, and then we'll have something we have where we actually having some sort of engagement nearby, so we don't get into the space from
engineering. In the state, those lots of areas, transit, money, there's some of these that are a lot of that I find where that can meet with those. I mean, they are controlling the conversation. Really, the one in our.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, one of those discussions happening piecemeal, if you can start that your agency or cooperation, earlier, you're just gonna get more involved. Now that you know what's on the horizon, you're having more opportunities. I think we have to reconvene at the end here. I don't know how the plan is to have a report out. But that may not occur. So, yeah, any other questions, any other, yeah. Yeah, so since we're not doing any social media engagement, we provide a lot of copy and a lot of the strategy for that. We definitely incorporate that. And I think it's changed to kind of get a read of how much community has really a following. People there who actually like engage the site, because that will help us determine how much of the media can be. Media has a great social media team members and we're the intern, who's doing a great job. People are engaged. That's next to cool, right? People prepared in that. And biggest barriers If anyone wants to have any additional questions.
Yeah. They're entering, but it's still out there. Oh, yeah.
We are. There is a proposal that I thought we had to at 1 o'clock, so just before we begin the class, we should probably do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.